Anyway, welcome to tonight's Stonington Democratic Presidential Mock Debate. Like any function, before we begin, we have a few announcements. We are in the mecca of the Stonington Community Center, which has been here since before I was born. And they are in need of financial funds to do renovations and make this a vibrant, continue to be a vibrant place in the community. So if you have any loose change, Jessica Morrissey is over there pointing at the glass bowl. Throw the Como a couple of bucks because they need it and it's the right thing to do. Also, we have index cards and pens in the back for the people who would like to write questions and have them read. We might as well get to the rules of the debate since I'm making them up as I go along. The candidates will be provided with 3 minutes to give their opening statements. That will be followed by questions. When a candidate is asked a question, he'll have 2 minutes to respond. In the instance where people come live and ask a question, they will be allowed 1 minute to respond, if you will, to the answer that the candidate gave to the question. So you ask a question of the candidate, they both answer it, then you have 1 minute to either ask another question or point out to them why they didn't answer your question in the first place. This time limitation, there are some issues that the candidates will want to talk about for more than 2 minutes. And we're willing to give them, extra time, but we just want to make sure that both candidates have the opportunity to speak for roughly the same amount of time. Lastly, the moderator will have full discretion over anything that's discussed. So with that, let me introduce the participants in tonight's debate. And there are some chairs up in the front for anybody that's brave enough to come up here. This evening, we have the pleasure of listening to some very bright and involved people about the politics that are current today. The first thing that I wanted to say after talking for 5 minutes is to tell you that we're here for a polite and respectful discourse among Democrats. So with that in mind, let me introduce you to the panel. Playing the role of Hillary Clinton is Debra Hauser. Debra is that's right, much more ravishing than Hillary, I think. But in any respect, Dr. Hauser is a clinical psychologist and a child advocate who's devoted most of her professional life advocating for children. She is, as you will see, a very strong, vibrant supporter of Hillary Clinton and all of the children's rights issues that Hillary is known for. So she won't give any quarter, and she will zealously represent the position of Hillary Clinton. So how about another round of applause for Debra? Our Bernie Sanders surrogate is Bill Curry, and he is a two-time candidate for the governor of the state of Connecticut, and he also is a political commentary. Yeah, thank you. He writes for Salon.com, so if anyone can't go to sleep at night and they want to look at his articles, I'm sure they'll be very invigorating. And last, but certainly not least, is Dr. Dorothy James, who is a professor of government and public relations, international relations from Connecticut College. She is a former provost of the college. She's highly recommended as a political scientist with a special knowledge of the presidency and public policy. And this semester, she's teaching a course at Connecticut College entitled Campaigns and Elections. So the last thing is this microphone that I'm speaking in is going to be right there. If anyone wants to ask a question, they can come up and address the panel, or they can go to the back and write a question and hand it to us all. With that said, and I'm sure I forgot to tell you some very important things, but we'll let the debate begin.
Is this on? Yes. Can you? Oh, good. To ease things up, I suggested that we drop titles and just use our first names. So Debbie and Dorothy. And when I asked Bill, he agreed happily and suggested that his nickname is Generalissimo.
Which was a joke.
Actually, he wants to be called the Supreme. But where it's a real pleasure to be here. Looking around, I can see that a lot of members of the audience have lived through a different era in our politics. Our politics now is so hideously polarized and vicious. But there was a time, and many of us can remember, when the norm of America was an assumption that reasonable people can disagree. And it is a real pleasure to be in a group that does believe in that kind of process and does believe in civil discussion. So I'm sure this afternoon or evening will fly. But what we've planned is, as has been said, that each spokesman for a candidate will have from 3 to 5 minutes. Then his or her opponent can respond, and then there can be a rebuttal. And I will be clutching my watch and staring at it regularly and hope I can get their attention, because these are people who care passionately, as they should, about their candidates. But we didn't speak about who should be first. Any preference?
Would you like me to go first? Yes, sure. Just tell me if people in the back, if you can hear, assuming you want to, if at some point over the course of the night my voice drops off, which it occasionally does, and you're still following, just raise a hand and I'll try to pick it up. I'm Bill Curry. I'm here to present the Sanders view of this election to the best of my ability. And let me just take 1 or 2 minutes, actually, to open this up. I used to joke when I was running for office that I was born into a family that believed that if you didn't vote Democratic, you couldn't be buried in the Catholic Church. It was an old culture of mid-century America, northeastern, midwestern America. And my devotion to my party, the other joke in my family is that my first word was vote, and I've been at this all of my life and cared about it all of my life. And my sense of my party as a tribune of working people, of the dispossessed, of the marginalized, that is its great historic role in the society, remains undiminished, even though I think that in recent years it has lost sight of that. And it's been a puzzlement in a way, a kind of paradox to watch. On the Republican side, there's been this extraordinary grassroots insurrection, this Tea Party insurrection. They went after scores of congressmen and senators, either defeated them in primaries or drove them in some other way from office, took over both caucuses in the United States Congress. And they did it despite having almost no differences with their party leaders. The main thing they held against their party leaders was that they hadn't done a good enough job of capturing and imprisoning the tyrant Obama. And other than that, you could barely find a difference. On the Democratic side, there were in fact profound policy differences between the elites and the grassroots, but there was no insurrection. And in fact, the grassroots in particular, because they found, I think, my theory would be they found the Republicans so scary and Bill Clinton and Barack Obama so nice, that they didn't so much reconcile the conflicts within the party as engross them within their personalities. And while there was a tremendous insurrection on one side, there was just dormancy on our side. And one of the things that makes, I think, the Sanders insurrection difficult for the establishment is that it finally begins a process of asking my party's elites whether they've remained loyal to the values of our party, to the traditions of our party, and to the base of our party. And I think this is very much what this primary race is all about. And it was a very difficult decision for me to take the course I've taken in this. But I honestly believe that the fundamental model we're working with, from neoliberal economics, globalization, information technology-driven, growth-driven, the idea that a rising tide will lift all boats, the idea that increased global integration and trade, unrestrained global trade, are the path to a secure middle class. I don't think it's true. The idea that those things lead to innovation, I don't think they do. I don't think this system runs on innovation. I think it runs on corruption. I think that there's a pandemic of public corruption around the globe. I think it's here, only here it doesn't take the form of so much of bribery. That's how somebody may get a parking authority from a councilman. I think here it takes what's called soft corruption, in Anthony Kennedy's term. It's pay-to-play politics, and it's the fuel of this new global economy. And I think that in order to fix anything, we have to fix it. I'll just conclude. I saw a wonderful interview with the great humanitarian and musician Bono, and he went to Africa. And he said he went to Africa because of AIDS. And he was there a few years, and he began to believe that AIDS wasn't really the problem. The problem was poverty. And he went back a few more times over the next few years, and he realized that the problem wasn't poverty, it was corruption. Corruption, the problem that keeps all the other problems from being solved. And there's too much influence of the most powerful interests, the most wealthy interests over the government. I don't think our problem is partisan polarization. I don't think it's partisan gridlock. I think it's the hammerlock that moneyed interests have in this government. And my support for Bernie Sanders is based upon my deep, deep belief that we have to bring it to an end.
Thank you. Well, first of all, I'd like to say thank you all very much for coming, and to the organizers of this event for reaching me and for putting up with all of my worried emails. And where is Mark? I don't see him now. Oh, there he is. Hi, Mark. Anyway, Mark, you've been very, very kind, and I know you went to great lengths with lots of integrity to make sure that this debate was fair and balanced. So I'm very grateful for that. I want to say a special shout out to Congressman Joe Courtney, who's one of my favorite people, and his Chief of Staff Cutter. I'm new to the second CD. I used to live in New Haven, where I'm very fond of Rosa DeLauro as well, but we moved to Clinton about 3.5 years ago. And I like to say that I take my candidates very seriously, hence my move to Clinton, Connecticut. So I'm very honored to be, sitting next to Bill Curry, who really has a storied career in politics, and it's really a pleasure to be here with you. And Dr. Dorothy James, who really is a trailblazer, much like Hillary Clinton in her career and in her thinking about politics and political science and government in the United States. I come at this a little bit differently. Is this okay? So, I grew up in Parma, Ohio, which was a working class town, and my parents were first-generation Americans. My grandparents had come from Austria-Hungary and had lost everything in the war. And I think in some ways they were quite distrustful of government. And in fact, my mom, when I was growing up in high school, or probably earlier than that, she would frequently say, "You couldn't fight City Hall." And I rejected that early because my mom always said I was very active, too active, and very energetic. And so I've sort of been an activist. I'm temperamentally an activist. So it was hard for me not to believe that if I couldn't put my energy to good works, that good things wouldn't come from it. So I came to politics later in life. I'm a clinical psychologist. I have a daughter who's now 27, doing beautifully. But during her teenage years, she took me to parts of New Haven that were very troubled and very depressed. And it was there that I saw poverty up close and personal. And one night when I was looking for her, I felt like I had what felt like a religious experience, feeling like there was so much despair and unhappiness, and that I really felt called to do something about it. And it was really quite a shock, because I really hadn't, my whole life I had wanted to be a clinical psychologist. I was so happy to be able to go to graduate school and get my degree and then open up my practice. So it came as quite a surprise to me that I felt completely okay in closing my practice in 2006 and throwing myself into politics as a complete newcomer to politics. I had no idea where to start, because if you feel called to service, but you don't really get a roadmap, and so I was trying to figure out what I was going to do in order to help poor children and poor families, and so I just threw myself into politics. I did interview a lot of Republicans because I wasn't sure which party I should belong to, so I had lunch with some Republican hedge fund types, and they were very nice, but I realized that my values were in alignment with democratic values. So my first person I had supported was Rosa DeLauro, who is a champion on children and vulnerable families, and actually started the baby caucus, even though she didn't have children of her own. So that's really sort of how I started. And John DeStefano, I supported him, went door to door, and did everything I could for him because I knew how much he cared about the children of New Haven. So that's how I've come to it. I met Hillary Clinton through a mutual friend. We used to go to Martha's Vineyard in the summers, and she was running for the United States Senate, and I was invited to an event. And it was the first time I ever saw her, and I really felt deeply enamored with her, her stance. As you know, she has a 40-year record on helping children and families, starting with after graduating law school, working for the Children's Defense Fund. So I felt very passionately about Hillary Clinton, and that has only grown as I've gotten to know her and what she stands for. And so now I have been, I was very involved in 2008, was a delegate, which I didn't even know what that was. They're like, do you want to be a delegate? I'm like, well, what's the delegate? So I was very happy to go, and it was very exciting. And so when I was the chair of Ready for Hillary in Connecticut for 3 years. I like to say I was the self-appointed chair of Ready for Hillary Connecticut. And so when she announced, I really was overjoyed and have really devoted all of my time, other than to my family, to working on behalf of Hillary Clinton and her presidency. So I would just like to, I talked too long. Okay.
No, not too long, but we can continue this.
Not as long as I did.
Is
I
that
don't
true?
think, yeah.
On my watch, you have equal time.
Okay.
What we want to do is we have 3 different types of questions. We have questions that have been sent in by email, questions that you have written, which I guess you're going to have to get to me, and then just questions from the floor. But before we get into those questions, Bill and Debbie, we spoke and exchanged some emails. None of us had met until tonight. But one of the things that Bill particularly suggested was that there are some topics that really have not been dealt with, though they're important to both of the candidates and very important to us as citizens, but they really haven't been dealt with in the formats of the debates and the town hall meetings. And particularly, he suggested the issue of climate change is something that is crucial and not well discussed in terms of their viewpoints. So each candidate will have, representative of a candidate, will have a chance to suggest what their candidate has as a platform and an approach to climate change. There may be other issues like that you want to have brought up. I won't go down the list of all the things we thought of that aren't adequately covered in the town hall meetings and the debates, but that one seemed particularly important and a special omission. So, Bill, would you?
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that we gave it adequate time. And as part of writing for Salon, I made it my business to not only watch all the debates and all the town halls, but download all the transcripts and annotate them.
Wow.
And I do this for you, okay, just so you know. And on the Republican side, apparently, all the networks decided that Republicans don't care about climate change, and so they didn't ask them any questions. And they finally got to Miami, and only because 20 Republican and Democratic mayors signed a petition to CNN asking, here they are, they're having a debate in a town that's sinking.
Right.
Okay? They've got, they were lucky they didn't have to do the Q&A with water wings. And they're sitting there in Miami talking away, and finally comes the first Republican question on climate change. Meanwhile, we have this separate discussion going on in the country. The front page of the New York Times, the Times has been wonderful about covering climate change in the last year. They've really done superb work. And not so wonderful about insinuating it into the coverage of the campaign. And so you read that for the second time, there's a major study which indicates that this is moving even faster than we thought. We're realizing that this next generation of children, Stonington won't be here at the end of their lives. The entire coast of this state, where I've lived my whole life, of Maine, where I go all the time, it breaks my heart to see what's happening. Half the moose are gone from northern New England. The lobster are all going to Canada. The coral reefs are bleaching. You've lost millions of acres of grazing land in the Southwest. You have the apricot harvest. Everywhere you look, we're being dismantled right now, and it's almost an afterthought. You can go through all this. I'm putting all those transcripts now into a single file to do some search on. And I just looked up, I'm about 2/3 of the way through, and I can't find the word water. There are 34 states in a drought right now, and I can't find the word water in the debate. Now, one of the reasons I'm for Bernie Sanders is that he's the best person on this by a long ways, and a difference I have with Secretary Clinton, who did, as Bernie said today in Albany, but I wrote about this in Salon a year ago, she traveled the world as Secretary of State encouraging countries to do more fracking. She didn't do it because of contributions. She did it because she believed it. She did it in good faith. It's just wrong. It took her a long time to get to on the XL pipeline. And it comes to a central question between the candidates. Do you understand how much of this carbon we have to leave in the ground? And do you understand that we're running out of time? And the person with the strongest record by far on this in the race of all the 22 people who ran is Bernie Sanders. And it was one of the two, along with the basic issue of public corruption and its connection to the declining fortunes of the American middle class, it's what brought me to want to support him. And I just think that all of us have an obligation as this campaign goes on. An election is supposed to be this moment in which these kinds of choices are illuminated and elevated. And instead, amidst all the horse race politics, they actually get shoved aside. The most vital questions. It breaks your heart to watch it. And so there are 2 or 3 issues that this race, both this primary race and again the general election, ought to be all about. And climate change is one of them. And the last sentence I'll say about it, not just because of the apocalypse that arises from our interaction, but because our chance to change the basic model to one of sustainability, of sustainable growth, based on conservation and renewable energy. The jobs here, we led the world in the 1990s in our economy because we led the world in information technology. This boom is even bigger, and we're missing out because we don't get it. And so I've never seen an issue with such a big upside and such a big downside, and I've never seen an issue so immediate with so much evidence in front of us being so ignored, even to this point, by the political class. And so I just think that's why I think it's important for us to insist that everybody, Bernie included, that everybody talk about this more and push it more because there's so much to do.
I might suggest, meaning no disrespect, that perhaps we hold our applause until the end, because I think we'll find that each person has some things to say that really we want to support or at least value, and perhaps we can do it in one wonderful roar of appreciation. Yes, Debbie.
So Hillary Clinton believes unequivocally that climate change is the primary existential threat to the world. I was very proud of our president when he, people have been talking about ISIS, and ISIS has been very flagrant, florid in their beheadings and garnering our attention. And I really, really, really liked that President Obama had pivoted from terrorism, not that he was diminishing it, but that ISIS is, it's sort of the shiny object of the media attention, but in fact, the greatest threat to all of us is climate change. And Hillary Clinton unequivocally believes that. She has talked a lot about, and what I like about Hillary Clinton is she tends to connect the dots. So she wants to have America be a clean energy superpower, which is really something in our grasp. Committing to reduction of carbon emissions by 30% by 2025 and cutting them by 80% by 2050. So I think, like Bernie, Senator Sanders, forgive me, I think Democratic candidates for sure believe in the dire threat and what'd you say? It begins with an A.
Apocalypse?
Thank you.
Yeah.
I was having trouble with that word.
Yes.
So I think the thing that I don't know specifically about this fracking issue, I can't imagine that Hillary Clinton would want to knowingly poison the earth. I think my understanding of her position is that she's always trying to find the safest ways to provide additional energy. But no matter, she absolutely wants America to lead on wind and solar. And in fact, reviewing her stuff, had set national goals on her campaign to have 500 million solar panels installed. That's enough renewable energy to power every home in the United States. I think the other thing I'd like to say is that Hillary Clinton is often very pragmatic and even-handed, so that she understands that we need to reduce our carbon footprint profoundly. She also wants to align incentives for companies, that so that their profits need to be aligned with green energy goals. But the thing that she is also concerned about is she didn't want to hollow out the coal industry. Now, that's not to say that she wants to have, dirty coal, but that she was cognizant that she represents 50 states, the entire United States, and so that she was going to try to find ways to find work for all of those workers who would be put out of jobs once this new clean energy initiative would take place. And I appreciate that because she's always thinking about all people and all states to the best of her ability.
Thank you. Do you have any rebuttals either of you wants to make to the other?
I'll just say this, that and I don't think anyone thinks that Secretary Clinton wants to poison the earth, and I would want any president to take into account the interests and the values and the needs of all 50 states. But I would also just look at the last debate in which the Secretary did say on the issue of fracking that she would leave it to the governors, that she presented fracking as a states' rights issue. And it isn't. This is a national emergency. It's a global emergency and a national emergency. And the second thing is I understand the idea of incentivizing corporations. I think that we've overextended the metaphor of the marketplace. We've extended it to education, to healthcare, to things where it just doesn't work. The extension of the marketplace metaphor to energy created this thing called cap and trade. You can't find one congressman other than Joe who understands what was even in the damn bill. It was so complicated, and I worked on it. And in fact, what we used to do prior to the great deregulation craze of the 80s and 90s, we made laws. We didn't just say we're going to try to create some abstruse market mechanism to incentivize the automakers. We said you're going to go 55 miles an hour and you're going to get the following fuel efficiency, and et cetera, et cetera. We used the role of government as rule maker needs to be rescued here. I have differences with the president, who's done a great, way better second term than first term. In his first term, he told his appointees not to bring this up in public. We stopped talking about it, even in Hurricane Sandy in 2012. Our establishment in both parties has been negligent. The last thing I just want to say is, of course we're better than the Republicans. We're way better.
That's true.
But this party that I still love You know, it can't run forever on the slogan, die slower, vote Democratic. We have to actually fix these problems. We have to put real concrete solutions on the table that solve the problem in time. And we haven't done that yet. We certainly haven't done it with fracking, and we haven't done it with climate change in general.
Did you want a rebuttal?
Yeah, I would underline what Bill had said, that of course that climate change is something central, should be a central issue. I mean, you know, Al Gore had started this, I don't know how many decades ago, I'm sad to say. And I think finally, at the behest of President Obama, we are now beginning to really talk about these issues in a way that will benefit you know, the public discourse, but also to make change. So I don't think there's much more I need to say.
Thank you. We'll start the questions now, first with an email question and then one from the audience. The first email question, doing a complete switch of topics, deals with cyber attacks. And this comes from Kevin, a Board of Education member from the city of Norwich. And what he asks is, I've read numerous news articles about personal social media accounts, government information employee accounts, banks, etc., being hacked by unknowns. What will President Sanders or President Clinton do about cyber attacks?
Well, first of all, what I know about my own email, you could put in a thimble and still sew. So my own knowledge of the technical issues here is quite limited. But let me just point out a couple things about it. And I don't want to just be criticizing the president, because there are a lot of good things to be said about this president as well. But generally speaking, again, my party as a whole, you know, people look at the government, and what they see is a car with a cracked engine block. And the Democrats are the party of government, and they don't want to give us the keys to that car until the engine's fixed. And so even though the Republicans have never been less popular in the history of their party than they are right now, including Watergate, we're still tied in all these national polls. And I think there are a couple of things we need to do. And the first thing is restore integrity, but the second thing is run the government better. When the president started out, he had a cybersecurity task force from which he promised to report in May of the first year, which was an unrealistic goal. When they couldn't meet it, it disappeared. And one thing about the Clinton administration, and I was very privileged to work in that administration and with Vice President Gore and with the president on reinventing government. And one of the great strengths of Bill Clinton and Al Gore was they loved to get under the hood. They really cared how the damn thing worked, every last piece of it. And I think that in this message politics, money-driven politics, slogan-driven politics we have, there are fewer people actually running the shop. And so when I read that our own capacity in cybersecurity has not kept pace, not only with other nations, but within our nations, that the government lags so far behind the private sector, I believe that reflects an ongoing, and again, Bush was worse. I don't want, not even worth getting into, but it reflects an ongoing inattention. This is, I did actually have, a long time ago when I was comptroller, I did a report to reorganizing all the computerized financial information systems in the state. I spent every weekend with people from OPM and DAS trying to put it all together. We finally agreed, all three of us, and then I lost an election and Roland killed it. And the main thing I learned then, and again, I'm not a technical expert in this, but the main thing I learned is that management problems hide behind technical problems. People get lost in these technical issues, and they don't understand that there's a basic management paradigm behind it, and that if you fix that, if you fix those fundamental management questions first, the technical questions tend to sort themselves out. We can absolutely deal with this. I have no question about it, but we haven't produced the kind of management attention at the top that it takes. I'll make one more point on energy, which is the two things. Our most vital areas to cyber attack are energy and food. And you may have heard the phrase distributed generation. What it means is that we don't have everybody on a grid, either the national food grid or the national energy grid, that we have more local farms, we have more local energy, that more people every year are getting off the grid. And one of the things that does is it stops cyber terrorism on food and energy in its tracks. And so again, if we look at the climate change model, we look at the economic model in which everything small is threatened by everything big, and we adopt a politics and an outlook that says that we're not going to let these massive financial interests destroy the biodiversity of our pond. You get cybersecurity, at least on those two most fundamental of issues, energy and food, the problem all but goes away from having the right economic model to begin with.
So it was very interesting when my husband and I, we filed our income taxes, and we received notification from the IRS that we had already filed our income taxes.
Great.
Yeah, and that we were due a refund. So the reason I'm telling you this story is because someone, through all the hacking of Anthem Blue Cross, I'm presuming that the breach of Anthem Blue Cross Blue Shield was that the cyber attackers were able to obtain my husband's Social Security, and then file. I guess it's a whole big thing they do now. They submit a claim and they make sure they fiddle with your numbers so that you get a refund, and then they send it to some unknown address. So and it's been very difficult working with the IRS because you have to really prove that you're really you, and then it takes a lot of time to do that. So it was very, very inconvenient and scary, frankly. So Leon Panetta had said the greatest threat, terrorist threat to the United States was not ISIS or the Taliban or Al-Qaeda, but in fact it was cyber attacks. And Hillary Clinton is very aware of the danger of cyber attacks. And one of the things she talks about are the 3 tests of this next president. 1, to be able to deliver on what you say and on your promises. 2, to keep the country safe. And 3, to unite unite America. And so with regard to safety, I feel that Secretary Clinton is very, very strong and is very, very serious about protecting America, and is very strong and well-versed in both foreign policy and homeland security. So I don't have any specifics of how you actually put in firewalls, and I don't like Bill, I'm not technically savvy on this, but I do know that I personally was quite alarmed when hackers had hacked the White House. Like, how safe can we feel when the hackers are hacking the White House? So I do think that Hillary Clinton is aware of the immense danger and potential catastrophic events of shutting down water, shutting down electrical grids, and the like. And I'm sure she will be quite strong on convening a task force once she, probably in her first 100 days.
Thank you. Our next question will come from the audience, whoever will be the brave soul to speak first. Yeah. Well, what Mark had suggested.
Hi, I'm Jim. I'd like to ask a question from the Secretary of State. Why did you use a personal email account to send out private information on our government?
Well, thank you for the question. As you know, she was not the only Secretary of State who ever used a private email address. And I think her explanation for having a private server in her basement was because she was married to a former president and was concerned, given all the cyber attacks and all the hacking into the White House, that they were trying to protect themselves from hacking. She's clearly said that that was not her best decision, and she apologized for that. Secretary Powell, a Republican appointed Secretary of State, had said that she has done nothing wrong, that many of the secretaries had used private email accounts. The president knew that she was using a private email account, and that she had, as you all know, she withstood 11 hours of grueling questions regarding all of this, and did so with flying colors. So it's my understanding is that none of those emails were classified at the time, and that frequently after someone leaves their position, their emails are then classified. that's the extent of my understanding.
Well,
Thank
also, my understanding is that in my job, working for the government, if I did any of that, I would lose my job, plus I'd be thrown on the frying pan. So why isn't she? Why aren't you?
Well, I'm not privy to anything, inside information about that. I know that she has, obviously she's turned over her server to the FBI. She's fully cooperated. She continues to say that she did not do anything illegal, and again, withstood Republican excoriation for 11 hours, and there has been no indictment, and there's no indictment expected.
For balanced time, is there someone in the audience who would like to ask a question specifically of Sanders?
Could I just say a word about Deb's answer? And I would just say this. Allow me to be here in two roles. As a renowned Bernie Sanders impersonator, I would like to say we've all heard enough about your damned emails. And
thank you, Senator Sanders. We appreciate that.
It's really, it was nothing. And then as myself, I want to add one thing, and to me, the issue here, this isn't, we'll find out. It's a delicate question. I certainly hope that James Comey, the Bush administration holdover, that the president unaccountably appointed head of the FBI, and whom I don't trust much more than I trust Ken Starr, but I hope he winds this up fast, because he owes it not to Hillary Clinton, but to the democracy. And I don't know what it will show. I don't have a clue. But putting all those issues aside, and assuming that this has the best possible outcome from the Secretary's perspective, the issue here is secrecy. And I just want to say something about secrecy in foreign policy. When I think about my government, my federal government, and its conduct of the foreign policy and national security issue of this country in my lifetime, every time it operates in secret, it embarrasses me. Every time it operates in public, it makes me proud. If it's the Marshall Plan, or the Alliance for Progress, if they did it in an open forum, it ended up representing the highest ideals of my country. And it could bring a tear to my eye, quite literally. And if they did it in secret, you end up with the Iraq War, Honduras, Guatemala, 100 deposed foreign leaders. None of it has worked in our interest. No more secrets. That ought to be the motto of foreign policy reform in this country. And there is a great difference both in how they voted and in how they've behaved between the two Democratic candidates on the issue of the openness of government and how they understand it, how they've approached every one of these issues from Edward Snowden. Well, anyway, how they've approached and discussed all the issues that are on the table now, how they voted throughout their careers. And one of the promises of the Obama campaign in 2008 was that this would be the most open and accountable government. It would treat whistleblowers as heroes. And I believe that we've paid a price for not following through on that, as I myself, as one citizen, would have liked. So that's the underlying issue. Are we going to have a foreign policy, a national security policy, in which everything is open and on the table for once? We'll be a better country if we do.
Did you have a rebuttal you wanted?
No.
Yeah, we kind of agree.
You have written questions, if you could give them to me, please. Thank you. Okay, this one from a member of the audience is, as president, is it more important to see what the electorate wants and then make policy decisions, or should you be adhering to a set of principles and attempt to get the electorate to agree with you?
Oh, boy. First of all, who wrote that question? Right there.
What's your name?
Do you want me to do it, Debra, or do you want to go?
No, please.
Well, I would just say there's no easy answer. Someone gave me a wonderful piece of advice early on in my adult life. I don't think it was his original idea, but I got it from my dad, who said it's important to fight for your convictions, not your opinions. and it's a wonderful distinction. And on all those things that are merely opinions of mine, I want to listen to every last person I can find. And in a democracy, we build constituencies behind ideas. That's what the essential act of political leadership in a democracy is. And that involves, what Gandhi, said there was a chemical interaction, a literal, almost as if it were an actual literal chemical interaction. And I tend to believe that. And so in that regard, you do. You listen and you build, and you listen and you build, and then finally you decide. And at the same time, one of the extraordinary things, people say that there are two types of leaders, and you might say that this campaign, a political scientist, no doubt, said once in some article I read that there were two types of leaders. As you all know, the world is divided into two types of people, those who divide the world into two types and those who don't. But in this case, the leaders were divided into two types. And one is the adaptive type that finds where things are going and trims around the edges and does the best you can. And the other is the kind, and I think Sanders is more, he's been both criticized and praised for this. One of the things I like most about him is that he is a person who looked out, saw where we were, and decided that he would stand his ground till the world came to him. It's almost the opposite of how politics works, especially in America these days. And right now he's being rewarded for it at a way that I think no one could have predicted. Clearly we need both. Clearly any leader needs to do both those things. But I would argue, one of the things I've said about Bill Clinton, I would say the same thing about Hillary and about Obama. Bill Clinton was as good a steward as this country's ever had as a president. His political instincts were as good as FDR's. If you look at all the decisions he made about how to handle crises as they arose, they were flawless judgments. Smartest man I ever met. A brilliant guy. He was a very good steward, but he wasn't a good reformer. When all the institutions are broken, maybe you could have just a steward in the 90s, but you need a reformer now. And the reformers tend to be the people who stood their ground and demanded that history come round.
Okay. Just as a reminder for Debbie, the question was, as president, is it more important to see what the electorate wants and then make policy decisions, or should you be adhering to a set of principles and attempt to get the electorate to agree?
The thing that I found when I first met Hillary Clinton, and Bill Clinton too, is I was deeply touched by how much I felt they loved America. Now that sounds corny, but I really felt like they both really loved America. And they've led their life that way. They have devoted themselves to public service since they graduated from law school. And so I think that is a really great way of, that's a great fundamental place to start. What I found particularly impressive as a psychologist, when Hillary Clinton, under the radar, began her listening tour across America. Because she had, when she was Secretary of State, she could not engage in any politics whatsoever. And so she had been out of touch with the electorate. And to her credit, she went on a listening tour, a national listening tour. And I was so touched when she went to that Chipotle restaurant. And the people who worked there didn't recognize her. And her and Huma had, like a burrito bowl. And I just thought to myself, that was the greatest thing ever, because she could see regular Americans working in a fast food place. She was paying attention. She was everywhere in the United States. And there were no cameras. She was in a minivan, apparently. That van was never even photographed. And she went on a tour to find out what was going on. And what she found out has been amazing. And it has really shaped her vision for America. So I do think, I agree with Bill, that it's got to be both. But I think first you have to feel and hear and listen to, citizens of America. And I think she did that. I mean, she talks about a crisis of caring in the United States, that there is a crisis of care for people with Alzheimer's, for the disabled. that when she was in Vermont and the Northeast, she was told, I think New Hampshire and Vermont, that there is a heroin epidemic, and that she would have only known that by going there, where families are saying, "I just lost my son," or "My daughter's in rehab for the 12th time." You know, so I think you can have a quote vision of America, you know, when you want to run for president, but you have to see what's going on in America before you can shape and develop that vision. So I think it is both. You start with listening to Americans, and also she's been very focused on building on the progressive advances of President Obama, and she's been unequivocal about that. And I think the combination of listening to Americans, the legacy of President Obama, expanding his legacy, as well as adding lots of new ideas, because Hillary Clinton's campaign is about ideas. And to Bill's point, Hillary Clinton could be faulted that she doesn't strike the same pitch as Senator Sanders, that she's not aspirational enough, that she hasn't spoken in a way that's transformational. But Hillary Clinton delivers. She does her homework. She works so very hard. That doesn't get much sleep. She wants to know how to deliver on making people's lives better. That is her primary focus, and will be her primary focus as president.
Thank you. We have, this is, if we do the rotation that was suggested to me, we would get to emails now. But there are a couple of email questions that overlap, very heavily overlap one of the written questions. So I think I'll just ask that instead. It is, how do you propose that college tuition be made affordable? In particular, how can college education be, quote, free? Please outline how this could be put into a pragmatic plan. Thank you. It says right there.
You want me to start? Let me just say that two things about it. One, as with a living wage, one, can you hear me? Again, do you want to? Okay. All right, okay.
They're here.
The idea has been sort of a theme of the campaign has been that this is somehow fiscally impossible. The idea that living wage, single-payer health care, universal public education through college, these have all been seen to be presented as, airy-fairy, idealistic, unrealistic. I would argue that the way we do it now is the most expensive way. I would argue that the student loans, I would argue that the healthcare system, we're doing it the most expensive way now. I would argue that we can't, again, we're the Democrats. We can't be the party that says that it's like reverse American exceptionalism, the idea that America is the only country that can do certain things. This is like reverse American exceptionalism, that America is the only country that can't, that everybody else in the world can have single-payer health care. Everybody else in the world can afford public education. Their economies aren't as strong as ours. They don't have our wealth, and they all do it. And there are many models that are out there. Let me just suggest two things about this, and this begins with public education from the beginning. Senator Sanders has put up a number of, I believe, and I don't have this all straight in my mind, so if I make a mistake, I apologize, but I believe he's dedicated the revenues from the transactions tax to this piece. But I think he's put a lot of revenue on the table. I don't know that it's enough or not. The day we passed Obamacare, nobody knew how many jobs were being produced or lost, or how many small employers were keeping health care. We had the entire government and both parties, both branches focused on the question, and we passed the bill, and Nancy Pelosi famously said, we don't know, in terms of the economics. On the question of whether, the fundamental point here, that community college and even college itself are today what high school was 50 years ago in terms of outfitting you for the market. I think that's true. the fundamental point that this system is absolutely unaffordable, I think that's true. I'll just go to one practical issue about this that's been raised, and that is whether or not you can get I'll just talk to the one that the Secretary raises most often, which is whether you can get the states to be involved. And I would just say this: there's been a huge outcry by this in crazy Republican Party over Obamacare. All of these states refuse to take Medicaid. I would point out to you that they had no disincentive. They lost out on what Obamacare offered, but they had no disincentive for the rest of their Medicaid funding. The federal government, for all of my adult life, has set the path on transportation. We don't build anything in the state without a federal application. And they've done it on all social welfare programs. There has never been a failure, except for Obamacare, of the federal government setting of the whole education funding thing, which I don't agree with. But there's never been an instance in which we didn't get the states to conform, ever, with the single exception of Obamacare. And I would argue that it's come at a time of extremism in the Republican Party, unfathomable hatred for Obama, and because unlike transportation and other Medicaid funding and other education funding, there was no hammer on it. They didn't pay a price with any other funding if they decided to step back. And so if the federal government steps in here and makes clear that other federal funding will depend upon your participation in the program, it's going to get its way. It always has. If you're arguing that it won't, you carry the burden of proof, and you're the person arguing against the accumulated experience of our own history.
The question is, how do you propose that college tuition be made affordable? In particular, how can college education be free? Please outline how this could be put into a pragmatic plan.
Hillary Clinton is very, very concerned and upset with the extraordinary problem of student debt. I think it's several $1 trillion, and which also, from what I understand, is going to be the next bubble because people are going to start defaulting like crazy. So she takes this very seriously, and she obviously takes education very seriously. Hillary Clinton does not believe it's economically feasible, that the numbers don't work for free public college education. She has a plan, a $350 million investment. I think that's the right number. I want to make sure I have that right. Oh, sorry. 300. I guess we don't talk in millions anymore. We talk in billions. $350 billion plan over 10 years, and it includes the following. I'm going to just read it just because I don't want to get it wrong. Ensure that no student has to borrow to pay for tuition, books, or fees to attend a 4-year public college in their state. Enable all students with existing student loans to be able to refinance their loans, because currently you cannot do that. So, we can refinance our home or refinance our car loan, but student loans are somehow locked down. And also, Hillary Clinton is very concerned about asking colleges and universities to hold down their costs. I went to Ohio State a long time ago, and I grew up in Ohio, so I was in-state tuition. My dad paid $600 a quarter for my college, and I think I had a couple $1,000s worth of debt when I graduated, and my dad paid it off as a graduation gift, which I was always very touched about. My son Max, who's is at Union College, and Union College is $62,000 a year. And it is really expensive, and that doesn't include books or trips or things like that. So Hillary Clinton is deeply aware of the ability for colleges and universities to continue to hike their prices. I believe, in my opinion, I can't speak for Secretary Clinton, that it has to do with easy access to student loans. So students can continue to borrow and borrow and borrow, and that allows college and universities to continue to hike their prices because it's easy to get a student loan, and so the colleges have no incentive whatsoever to keep costs down. So in keeping with Hillary Clinton's deep and abiding commitment to higher education, and making it affordable. She has some pragmatic solutions. She does believe that community colleges should be free. She believes that public colleges should be sort of a combination of fees. So students would have to work, she's advocating students would have to work 10 hours a week, that families would have to pay what they could afford, within reason, of course, and then there would be, funding from the federal government to cover the rest. So I think it's, again, in true to form, Hillary Clinton is seeing a big problem, putting forth a plan that is practical and attainable.
I think it's time for a question from the audience. Yes?
I have a question for Debbie. Secretary Clinton has claimed that she's in favor of the prison reform. However, according to an article published by the Huffington Post, she has taken substantial donations and money from private prison lobbyists, almost as much as Marco Rubio. So how does Secretary Clinton plan to rein in our arguably racist system of over-incarceration while pleasing her base?
Thank you for that very good question. It's something that's very near and dear to my heart, and I know it's very near and dear to Hillary Clinton's heart. First of all, it is my complete understanding that Hillary Clinton does not accept money from the prison industrial complex. I don't know what article you're referring to, but I know for a fact, at least I thought I knew for a fact, that she does not accept money from lobbyists regarding private prisons. My favorite speech, which I have listened to probably 5 times, is her speech on mass incarceration. And if you haven't seen it, I highly recommend it. She talks about that we have 5% of the world's population, and yet we house 25%. We have 25% of the prison population. And as a psychologist, and I love Hillary Clinton because she's very psychologically minded. She actually did a year of fellowship at the Yale Child Study Center where I'm on the clinical faculty. She's deeply aware that our prisons are filled with the mentally ill, the poor, and the vulnerable. And that's a direct result of the deinstitutionalization of mental institutions of the 70s. So she is extremely aware and deeply committed to overturning systemic inequality. And she is deeply and categorically aware that black families have been decimated by the incarceration, a huge amount of, young black men being incarcerated. So I feel very strongly, this is to me one of her signature issues, starting in Arkansas, where she was from 1979 working with children who were in juvenile detention. Most of those children were African Americans, and she has been fighting for racial equality since probably all of her life.
Thank you. Before Bill speaks, this gets to questions that have come in both by email and by hand. So let me add the rest of them to this broader discussion, and then each of you can have more than one chance to deal with it if you wish. But what you're dealing with is the question of criminal justice. And one of the email questions was, there's mass incarceration in this country like nowhere else in the world. Minorities are disproportionately arrested and jailed. Much of the incarceration relates to the war on crime and the rigid sentencing guidelines enacted. What could you possibly do, speaking to the candidates, what could you possibly do to eliminate institutional racism from our criminal justice system? And with that on a written card, there is, has the market model incentivized mass incarceration? So it's a big question on the judicial, criminal justice and judicial reform. And if you want to respond, and then you may have some other responses back and forth. I think it's obviously a question of big enough interest and importance, given the diversity of questions, for a little more time on it.
Absolutely. Deb, did you want to go first, or do you want me to?
No, please, no, I already talked, so I'll talk after you.
One of the hardest questions in the world, and I'll just say a couple of things. One, the racism that is residual within our culture is substantial. I especially support Senator Sanders' idea that whenever anyone is harmed while in the custody of the law, there be an immediate public federal review, that be an automatic part of the process. It's the right thing to do. And secondly, while the air has become charged, I don't mean within this campaign, but within the country, we were moving last year toward a much greater acceptance among all groups, clearly. Caucasians, African Americans, Asians, Hispanics, everybody was getting that there was something wrong. And support for instance, police wearing cameras hit 70%. The whole country was for it. It was really good news. I like reading polls that remind me of the essential good-heartedness of people. They were the people in every conceivable demographic group were responding with their hearts. It's gotten a little dicier since then. We've lost a little ground for a lot of reasons. But I think that there are things that we can do there. I'm in favor of all the sentencing reforms. I will go back, and I know that Senator Sanders is accused often of reducing these things to economic questions. But and I would just say that within the, I grew up in the north end of Hartford, and I had a middle-class family by culture, certainly. And but half the welfare population of the state was living in Hartford at that time, just about. And I've seen, and all my life, it was the key political lesson of my life, watching it. When people don't have options, when they don't have anywhere else to go, it turns out, in a great study done, people don't make that much money in the drug trade except for the guys in Colombia. In Cali, they make a fortune. These people in the street corners barely get by. A $15 minimum wage really would change something. There are a million things we could do. We should revise all of our federal contracting so that we get preference for jobs located in cities, for manufacturing cities, for federal grants, for federal support of all kinds. It would be an extraordinary change. Whether I'm looking at terrorism or I'm looking at crime, each go in cycles, and the question is what creates the cycle. And I think that we have an economy that creates a permanent underclass of people who are increasingly angry, frustrated, and nihilistic. And I believe that those systemic changes are as important as the ones that specifically pertain to the system itself. And so I'd change all the mandatory sentencing. I'd make every single change that Secretary Clinton and Senator Sanders have both agreed upon. I'd love to see them all done tomorrow. And then with our prisons, as with our schools, if we change the communities in which we see the problems happening, then I think that the next day you start to see crocuses bloom. The next day things begin to change. This is a problem of a sustained culture of non-opportunity and of poverty for far too many people.
Thank you. Did you want to respond to this broadened question?
Yes, please. So a couple of things. One, I have to say that Governor Dan Malloy has been very, very successful with the help of Mike Lawler, who has been reducing the prison population in Connecticut dramatically year after year. And I've been very proud of our governor with regard to the Second Chance Society. I think that's been very important. As I said, I worked in New Haven and in urban centers where, and I saw very, very clearly that if how black men are profiled, and the statistics bear it out, that they're more likely to be stopped and frisked and charged and sentenced and then given longer sentences. And then they come out, and Secretary Clinton does a lot of this with regard to reentry, that then when they come out of prison, they can't even get a job. And so she is working very hard. She has a whole series of things, but including, what's the expression?
Recidivism?
It's the box. Oftentimes in employment applications, there's a box whether you've ever been in jail or accused of, convicted of a crime. And she's working to, have those kinds of things removed from applications so people can have a chance to get work. Because talk about recidivism, if you can't find work and you can't support yourself, then the likelihood of you sliding backwards is quite significant. So the other thing I'd like to mention also is that Senator Blumenthal, I'm also very proud of, has been leading the Senate, I believe, regarding that if you are hurt or killed while in custody, that there is now a database. So that, because it's never been tracked before, people being killed while in, or not killed, but somehow dying in custody has never really been analyzed or, data been obtained so that, you could see how cities are doing or states are doing or how America is doing. And Senator Blumenthal, I'm proud to say, has been leading that charge.
Your hand was up, and I do want to call on you. I want to wait for a minute because you raised something that comes up in emails. Stephanie asked, you raised the encouraging the $15 minimum wage. And Stephanie asks, how will the $15 minimum wage affect small businesses being the largest GDP is a concern for many? It's not so much the wage as it is the payroll taxes as a result. I understand our Connecticut payroll taxes have tripled since Malloy took over. So if you would address that from the side of the people who are earning money, $15 was something that you valued highly. And this is a question about how it affects another part of our society.
Let me say two things. It's a legitimate question. And I talked a little bit before about small businesses. And for every self-styled populist, understand that small businesses and small farmers were at the core, along with labor, of every populist movement the country's ever had. And they've all been built around agendas that drew them together. It is my experience in a lifetime in politics that small businesses get all the lip service and none of the service. And I talked before about these large institutions devouring the biodiversity of the pond. This is a war, if you will, of everything small against everything big that seeks to devour it. And I am very clear, it's one of the reasons why in my own life here I've fought so hard about property taxes, because that's what falls on small businesses the hardest and on families the hardest. We need property tax reform. We're the last state in the country to get it, and we ought to have it now. We could be bringing down energy costs. It's why when I was comptroller, I proposed the first public option in the country to open up the state employee health care plan to small businesses and the self-employed, because they pay more for health care, not because they get sicker, as the industry used to lie and say. They pay more for health care for the same reason that groceries cost more in the city, because they don't have the market clout to cut a better deal. And we could cut one for them and bring their costs down. We lost an enormous amount we lost terribly when we didn't put a public option for small businesses. And so when small businesses make this case about the minimum wage, I'm sensitive to it. It's the one exception to all of those policies that I feel we can go forward with. And I'll just say this, to the best of my ability, I'm not a professional economist, but I've read this material as seriously as I can for a very long time. And I find the idea that there are great job losses and a great burden placed on employers, it is factually speaking, to the best of my knowledge, the weaker side of the argument, substantially. I've never seen an argument so universally accepted on so little empirical evidence. And number two, I will point out, secondly point out, that it's by far the larger employers who are not paying the higher minimum wage, and it's the smaller employers who are. I don't have a statistic. I wish I did. I wish I'd been thinking about this heading down because I've got them in my drawer. But the overwhelming amount of this money the overwhelming economic impact here is in the, fast food chains, et cetera, et cetera. People who, that's where the raise is. And the last thing is that there's a whole other set of data on this that says, if you ever want to see a dollar again, spend it close to where you live, okay? And the people who get the people who get that money, they go out the next morning and spend it because they have to. And all of that money gets plowed right back into our small businesses. And if we're doing all of our economy in our own, right where we live, the people who need it most, this is so much better than the tax cuts they've given away in terms of being a way to prime the pump for the economy. When you put that money back where it's going to be spent the most, the people who need it the most, small businesses, there are winners and losers in this, I'm sure. But the overwhelming evidence is that it's the big employers who are paying the small business tab by a wide margin, and that when you prime the pump where the people really need the money and you put it back into your community, then that truly is the rising tide that lifts all boats.
Did you want to respond? Did you need the question?
Yes, would you mind restating it? Thank you.
How will the $15 minimum wage affect small business being the largest GDP? It is a concern for many. It's not so much the wage as it is the payroll taxes as a result. I understand our Connecticut payroll taxes have tripled since Malloy took over.
It's a very important question. Hillary Clinton would say that it doesn't seem right that you work 40 hours a week at the current minimum wage and not be able to support your family. The idea here was that raising the minimum wage, a living wage, as Bill had said, was to make work count, and that it wasn't just, and it wasn't the American way for you to work full time and not be able to support your family. So that's my understanding of the livable wage debate. As a performer, my husband was we had a business, a small business, and I can say that worse than payroll taxes were healthcare costs. So Hillary Clinton grew up in a suburb of Chicago. Her father, bless you, Gesundheit, was a small business owner. She never forgot where she came from. And she's very interested and very passionate about being the small business president and really trying to help cut red tape and allow for people to have access to capital and things that will continue to allow small businesses to stay in business and for entrepreneurs to start businesses, because I'm sure Senator Sanders would agree that the idea is to improve the economy and create good paying jobs. So I don't think I can offer anything more on the minimum wage. I mean, I know the theory goes that if you make employers pay $15 an hour to their employees, they'll just hire less. But I'm not entirely sure the data bear that out. Bill, do you have any thoughts on that one?
Again, as I said before, I didn't read a paper on my way in preparation for this evening, but I've been following this literature fairly closely all of my public life, and I'm just constantly impressed by how weak the empirical data is on the other side of it. There is some loss. There's no question that there is some, but all the claims on the other side seem to be really exaggerated, and. Again, it's just a question. We're constantly being told. I don't want to be told by my own party, And again, I know the Senate. Again, the differences among Democrats are narrow. Republicans are against any increase at all. Period. End of story. But the difference here between Bernie, who was out early when restaurant workers were working, trying to organize, and nobody thought that was possible, and when people had to go because the Democrats. Our president, our party decided not to raise the minimum wage when we had the votes in the House and the Senate in 2009 because they thought it would disrupt their relations with the business community. Shame on us. We left it at $7.25, and it took the secretary 6 years to say that there should be a higher figure. okay? Not enough for me anymore. Not enough. And the idea that we can't have single payer, or that we can't pay a $15 living wage, or that we can't do any of these things, I think the other lesson of Hartford to me was, it had the second worst disparity in income in the country after Newark, between inner city and suburban income in Hartford. And yet Hartford was a little town, 110,000 people. And to grow up there, you couldn't help but absorb this lesson, that the problem was political. These were just choices we made. If I walked a mile to West Hartford, everything was great. Everything looked fabulous. It was like Disney World. And here was this one, we weren't living in the Sudan or even the South Bronx. It was this one little community where they had all the poor people like they were locked up. And there were all the resources. And that, to a large degree, is still our country. And so, we can't have, we can't have free community college and a living wage and universal health care. Baloney. We could do it now. This is just a question of the political will.
Okay, for our last question, did you continue to want to your hand had been up, yes.
My question is for both of the candidates. I believe that cyber terrorism is one of the biggest things that are facing us. We'd probably die of climate change first, but my question,
that is bigger.
my point is that the knowledge is there to fix the internet so that cyber terrorism cannot be done. Apparently the reason the government hasn't made this change is because this country would no longer be able to spy on other people, other countries, if they change the way our internet service works. As the candidate, what would be your choice on keeping open the spy lines or protecting the country?
Okay. You'd like me to go first again?
I can
All
go.
right.
You want me to go?
I'll do that. First of all, I want to say that there were two premises in your question, and I agree with one, I don't agree with the other. And even though I do think this government has shown far too little regard for the privacy of its citizens and been far too willing to roll over that, I don't think it's a conspiracy. I think it arises from concerns. I may not agree with the decisions they make, but I think their concerns are legitimate. And I also think it's simply a question of incompetency. Often when I was talking to very conservative groups, when I was on the circuit all the time, I would listen to the evening and I would say, I hear two theories here. One of which is that there's this extraordinary government conspiracy going around that is the reason that everything is just awful. And the other is that the government's totally incompetent. And the thing is, only one of them can be right. And having worked for the government, I can tell you which one it is. It's the incompetent one, okay? And so we look and we see these conspiracies all the time, and partly I feel like it takes our attention away from all the conspiracies of the system itself that are sitting right in front of us. It's like Poe's purloined letter. It's right, the evidence is right there on the table, we can solve it. And so the second thing I would just like to say is that I think that corporations, I do see a problem, and I do feel that it's profoundly intrusive. But I also feel that it's as much in the private sector as the public sector. Google does now everything I'm worried the CIA might do in a year. And people, and I'm concerned about young people, and we have a few here, I want to say to you guys, do not trade your privacy for a Groupon discount, okay? There's a war here to be fought, and it's not simply privacy. In a sense, Justice Douglas in the Griswold v. Connecticut case was the first case to establish a right to privacy. He used some unfortunate language. He said it arose as a penumbra. He had this penumbra of rights that arose from the Constitution. The right to privacy didn't arise from the Constitution. The Constitution arose from the right to privacy. The right to free speech, the right to assembly, the right to petition. If you don't start with the right to privacy, none of those other rights mean a damn thing. And I wish my party had been a lot more forceful. By the way, Sanders has been great on this, and Hillary's record on it is one of her worst.
Privacy?
And the government, the government's supposed to be open to us and we're supposed to be private, and they switched it. The government has the privacy, and we're the ones that don't. And I think there's a lot we can do, but it's not just a government, I don't think it's a conspiracy, and I don't think it's just the government. I think it starts with the corporations, and I think it's embedded into this system. And the last thing I'll say is it's not just privacy, what I started before, it's not just privacy, it's our very personhood. It's our very autonomy as people, our ability to have our own thoughts and frame. We're framing our personality, we're framing our civic identity. All of this, when you're being constantly barraged, every time you get a letter from a congressman on an email, not Joe being accepted, but every public official who emails you and says sign a petition, there's no petition. They want to know they want to know what the next email should say to make you happy. We are losing a war with centralized information, which is as important a part of centralized power and centralized money as there is. And both parties, but the Republicans won't. There's an enormous opportunity for us to speak to the legitimate libertarian instincts in this country and stand for them. But we haven't. I'm sorry.
You didn't understand my question because you didn't answer my question.
I'm sorry.
I came back up here because it was probably me that didn't. This is an international issue of governments spying on governments, not on individuals.
Oh. I'm sorry, I didn't understand your question.
Yeah,
we should stop doing it. Secretary Clinton actually spied on the Secretary General of the United Nations when she was Secretary of State and signed off on it. She never, ever, ever should have done that, and it embarrasses us. We get nothing out of it. I'm deeply, deeply opposed to it, but it isn't just her. It's every Secretary of State, every president, every CIA director, and every defense.
But it could be fixed if this country said, let's take our spy situation and negate it, stop it. But doing that is not being done because then we lose the ability to spy on those other countries.
We've gotten so much less out of this intelligence than we claim to have gotten.
I
There's
know.
some intelligence is legitimate, but what I said before, I'm just going to say one sentence and I'm going to stick with it. I'm going to give it over to Deb. And that is that when we act in secret, we tend to disgrace ourselves. And when we act publicly, we tend to do things that make us proud to be Americans. And the more open our foreign policy and intelligence, the answer to that secret gathering is to end the secret keeping. And I know we can't do that to 100% perfection, but if we could do so much better than we're doing. And I would love to see something in Congress, and I would love to see a president who really, really took that seriously.
I don't know of Hillary Clinton's position on whether we should shut down internet spying on governments. I can't speak to her position, but I can speak about things that are deeply important to her. And as I said before, the test of the next president will be, can you deliver on your vision for America? 2, can you keep us safe? And 3, can you unite America? And Hillary Clinton is very serious about keeping America safe. And she has been very well liked by the generals in the military. She is very well versed in defense strategy and foreign policy, as you know. But she's also been someone who talks very, very much about adhering to American values. So it is a fine line between keeping America safe, which we really don't want another 9/11, certainly anything like that. But at the same time, you're right, we are losing, after the Patriot Act, we have been losing our rights to privacy. But I think that Hillary Clinton is very well positioned to continue to lead the world in what she called soft power, which is a combination of both carrots and sticks is the word that she uses, so that she's perfectly able to enact sanctions around the world, but at the same time, she traveled to 112 different countries when she was invited. She could have just done a Skype, but she went to restore our reputation in the world. She went to restore friendships, to make new friendships, all of which ultimately will bode well for keeping America safer. So it's not exactly to your question, which is, will she fundamentally alter internet capabilities? That I don't know. But I know that she's profoundly concerned about keeping America safe while adhering to American values.
Well, the time has flown, and I want to thank our speakers who've given a very thoughtful response, and to you, an audience who do prove that reasonable people can disagree. And also, I want to thank Mark particularly for making this whole evening possible. His energy and drive got this to happen. And we haven't scratched the surface of your questions or all the different questions that have been sent in, et cetera, but it's a beginning. And whatever differences we may have, we're not the Republicans.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Professor, thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr.
Thank
James.
you.
Really very
Thank you very
helpful.
much.